Imagine a food so valuable that entire kingdoms depended on it. A food that survived brutal winters, crossed mountain ranges, fueled armies, paid taxes, and even found its way into ancient religious ceremonies. Today, it sits quietly in refrigerators around the world. We spread it on toast without giving it a second thought. Archaeological discoveries have revealed jars containing preserved dairy products buried alongside the dead. Egyptians believed that certain foods would accompany people into the afterlife, providing nourishment for eternity. Butter was valuable enough to make that journey, although it wasn't as central to Egyptian cuisine as it would become elsewhere. Its presence inside royal tombs shows that it carried prestige and significance. Meanwhile, across Mesopotamia, where some of the world's earliest cities flourished between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, butter became an important agricultural product. Temple records and clay tablets reveal highly organized farming systems that managed enormous herds of cattle and sheep. These institutions collected milk, processed dairy, and distributed food to workers, priests, and officials. Butter. It seems ordinary, almost boring, but for thousands of years, butter wasn't just food, it was wealth, it was medicine, it was a symbol of prosperity, and in some parts of the world, it was considered more valuable than gold. This is the story of how a simple block of churned milk fat helped shape civilizations, connected distant cultures, survived the rise and fall of empires, and became one of humanity's oldest companions, long before roads, before kingdoms, and before written history. Someone accidentally created butter. That accident would quietly change the course of civilization around 10,000 years ago. The Ice Age had finally loosened its grip on the earth. Across the fertile valleys of the Middle East and the rolling grasslands of Asia, humanity was entering a new age. Instead of wandering endlessly in search of wild animals, people began settling in one place. Villages appeared. Fields were planted. Animals were no longer hunted, alone they were raised. Among those animals were sheep, goats, and cattle, creatures that offered something extraordinary. They didn't just provide meat, they gave milk, a renewable source of nourishment that could feed entire families day after day. But milk came with a problem. Without refrigeration, it spoiled quickly. In warm weather, fresh milk could become undrinkable within hours. For early farmers, losing milk meant wasting one of their most valuable resources. They needed a way to preserve it, though they had no laboratories, no chemistry, and no understanding of microorganisms. Sometimes history doesn't change because of careful planning. Sometimes it changes because of an accident. Many historians believe butter was discovered by traveling herders, carrying milk inside bags made from animal skins. These bags were tied to horses, donkeys, or camels as people crossed long distances over rough terrain. Hour after hour, the milk was shaken by every step of the journey. The cream inside constantly collided with itself, while the changing temperatures of day and night slowly altered its structure. Eventually, something remarkable happened. Tiny droplets of milk fat began sticking together. The liquid separated. Inside the bag was a soft, golden substance, unlike anything the travelers had seen before. Instead of spoiled milk, they had created butter. They couldn't have known the science behind it. They didn't understand that the motion had broken the membranes surrounding fat molecules, allowing them to combine into solid butter, while leaving behind buttermilk. All they knew was that this new food tasted rich, lasted longer than fresh milk, and provided enormous amounts of energy for people who spent their lives walking across mountains, crossing deserts, and surviving harsh winters. That discovery was priceless. Butter solved problems that had challenged humanity for generations. Milk was bulky and perishable. Butter was compact and energy-dense. A relatively small amount could provide enough calories to sustain someone during long journeys or difficult seasons. During winters, when crops failed and hunting became unpredictable, butter became more than food. It became security. Communities that could preserve dairy had a better chance of surviving famine. Families with healthy herds could transform surplus milk into a product that remained useful long after fresh milk had spoiled. Slowly, butter evolved from a fortunate accident into one of the earliest food preservation technologies in human history. As farming spread across continents, butter traveled with it. Archaeologists have discovered chemical traces of ancient dairy fats inside pottery dating back more than 7,000 years. These discoveries reveal that early farming societies were already experimenting with processing milk into different products. While not every vessel can be identified as butter production, the evidence shows that humans had begun mastering dairy long before written records existed. By around 3000 BC, butter had become important enough to appear in ancient artwork. Stone carvings from Mesopotamia depict people milking animals and processing dairy products, suggesting that butter making had become an organized craft rather than a lucky accident. Knowledge passed from parents to children. Villages developed their own methods. Entire communities depended on these skills. As civilizations expanded, butter took on different forms across the ancient world. In cooler northern regions, cattle became the primary source of milk. Across the vast grasslands of Central Asia, nomadic tribes churned butter from sheep, goats, horses, and even yaks. High in the Himalayas, yak butter would eventually become a tradition that survived for thousands of years. In other regions, buffalo milk produced richer varieties with their own unique character. Each culture adapted butter to its own environment. The process remained similar, but the traditions became uniquely local. Over time, butter became more than a practical food. Its rich golden color reminded many cultures of sunlight, warmth, and abundance. Producing butter required healthy animals, plentiful grazing land, and successful harvests. Families capable of making large quantities often enjoyed higher social status because butter represented stability and prosperity. Soon, it entered religious life as well. Clarified butter was burned in ceremonial lamps. Offerings of butter were presented during sacred rituals. In some cultures, it symbolized purity. In others, it represented divine blessing or gratitude for nature's generosity. A simple accident had become something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Butter was no longer just a source of nourishment. It had become part of humanity's identity. Yet, despite its growing importance, butter still had one serious weakness. It spoiled in warm climates. Valuable stores could disappear within days, threatening communities that depended on them. If butter was ever going to feed larger populations, travel greater distances, and become one of history's great trade goods, people would need to discover new ways to preserve it. That discovery would reshape kingdoms, fuel explorers, and help build some of the greatest civilizations the world had ever known. The answer to butter's greatest weakness came from people who refused to let such a valuable food go to waste. Across ancient civilizations, farmers, herders, and traders experimented with ways to make butter last longer. They discovered that by gently heating butter, they could remove most of the water and milk solids that caused it to spoil. What remained was a golden, aromatic fat that stayed fresh for far longer than ordinary butter. Today, we know it as clarified butter. In South Asia, it became known by another name, Gido, for thousands of years. Ghee has been more than just a cooking ingredient. It became one of the most respected foods in human history. Ancient Indian texts, dating back over 3,000 years, describe ghee as a sacred substance. It was poured into ceremonial fires during religious rituals, offered to deities in temples, and used in traditional medicine. To many people, ghee represented purity, prosperity, and divine blessing. Even today, countless Hindu ceremonies continue to use ghee in ways that have changed very little over the centuries. But religion wasn't the only reason for its importance. India's hot climate made preserving ordinary butter extremely difficult. Clarifying it solved that problem. Without refrigeration, ghee could survive weeks or even months, making it ideal for long journeys, military campaigns, and trade across enormous distances. What began as a practical solution became one of the foundations of an entire civilization's cuisine and culture, far to the west. Another civilization was discovering butter's value in very different ways. Ancient Egypt is famous for its pyramids, magnificent temples, and elaborate tombs. But dairy also played an important role in everyday life. While cheese was generally more common because of the hot climate, butter was still produced, particularly among wealthier households. Butter had become part of an economy. It was no longer simply something families made at home. It had entered administration, taxation, and trade. As civilizations grew larger, butter quietly became part of the machinery that kept them functioning. Yet, perhaps nowhere was butter's importance more surprising than among the people who never stayed in one place. Across the endless grasslands of Central Asia, nomadic tribes depended on their animals for nearly everything. Their horses carried them, their sheep clothed them, their cattle and yaks fed them. Milk was transformed into cheese, yogurt, fermented drinks, and butter, each product serving a different purpose during long migrations across thousands of kilometers. For these travelers, butter represented portable survival. Every family knew how to churn it. Every child learned the process. It required no permanent settlement, no city, and no grand workshop. Only patience, skill, and healthy animals. These nomadic traditions would eventually influence some of history's greatest empires. Centuries later, the Mongols, whose empire stretched farther than any contiguous land empire before them, relied heavily on preserved dairy products during their campaigns. While dried curds and fermented milk often receive more attention in historical accounts, butter and clarified fats also provided concentrated energy for soldiers traveling across vast distances with incredible speed. Long before modern military rations existed, dairy fat helped fuel armies that reshaped continents. In Europe, butter's story unfolded differently. The Mediterranean world favored olive oil. Olive trees thrived under warm sunshine, producing an oil that became central to Greek and Roman cooking. To many Romans, butter was considered something foreign. They associated it with the tribes living beyond the northern frontiers of the empire. Writers described the people of Gaul, Germania, and Britain as butter eaters, contrasting them with olive oil-using Mediterranean societies. Some Roman scholars even viewed butter as a medicinal substance rather than an everyday food. Ancient physicians recommended it for treating burns, soothing skin conditions, and relieving certain illnesses. Ironically, the food many Romans considered unusual would eventually become one of Europe's defining ingredients beyond the Roman borders. Colder climates favored dairy farming over olive cultivation. Cattle flourished where olive trees could not. As generations passed, butter became deeply rooted in Northern European diets. Villages churned it daily. Monasteries perfected production methods. Markets began buying and selling it in increasing quantities. The divide between olive oil in the south and butter in the north became one of history's great culinary boundaries. That boundary still exists in many ways today, but butter's growing popularity created a new challenge. As more communities produced it, Transporting it safely over long distances became increasingly important. Fresh butter remained delicate. Moisture and time could destroy valuable supplies before they reached distant markets. Merchants needed better preservation techniques. Farmers needed larger production. Kingdoms needed reliable food supplies. These demands would transform butter from a household staple into an international commodity worth trading across seas, mountains, and borders. Soon, barrels filled with butter would travel alongside spices, textiles, metals, and precious goods, linking distant civilizations through commerce. The humble food that had once formed accidentally inside a bouncing leather bag was about to become one of the world's earliest global trade products. As the centuries passed, butter quietly became one of the most valuable products in medieval Europe. It wasn't displayed in royal treasuries or forged into weapons, yet entire economies depended on it. From isolated farming villages to bustling port cities, butter had become a source of wealth that connected ordinary people to international trade. In northern Europe, where cold weather favored cattle over olive trees, dairy farming flourished. Vast green pastures stretched across Ireland, Scotland, Denmark, the Netherlands, and parts of modern-day Germany. These regions discovered that their climate offered a natural advantage. Grass-fed cattle produced abundant milk, and that milk became butter. Unlike grain, which could fail during a poor harvest, healthy cattle continued producing milk throughout much of the year. For many farming families, butter became a dependable source of income. Every morning began with milking the herd. Cream was collected carefully over several days before being churned by hand using large wooden barrels. The work was exhausting. It demanded patience, strength, and skill. A single mistake could ruin an entire batch, yet the reward was worth it. Butter fetched high prices in nearby towns, especially during seasons when fresh dairy became scarce. Soon, butter markets began appearing across Europe. Farmers traveled for days, carrying heavy barrels packed with salted butter. These markets became gathering places where merchants negotiated prices, exchanged news, and formed trade partnerships that lasted generations. Salt changed everything. People had already discovered that salt preserved meat and fish. They soon realized it could preserve butter as well. By mixing salt into freshly churned butter, its shelf life increased dramatically. This simple innovation allowed butter to survive long journeys by horse wagon and ship. Salted butter became one of medieval Europe's most valuable food exports. Large wooden barrels replaced small household containers. Carefully packed and sealed, they protected butter from moisture and contamination during transport. Some barrels traveled hundreds of kilometers before reaching their destination. As trade expanded, certain regions became famous for producing exceptional butter. Ireland emerged as one of Europe's great dairy powers. Its mild climate and lush grasslands created ideal conditions for raising cattle. Irish butter developed a reputation for quality that spread far beyond the island itself. Merchants shipped enormous quantities across the Irish Sea into England and later throughout continental Europe. Butter became so important that it influenced taxation and land ownership. In some areas, tenants paid part of their rent with butter instead of money. Wealthy landowners accepted barrels of butter as valuable assets, while monasteries collected dairy products. Alongside grain and livestock, food had become currency. Monasteries played an unexpected role in butter's rise across medieval Europe. Monks carefully documented agricultural techniques, improving dairy production through observation and experience. They bred healthier cattle, refined churning methods, and developed cleaner storage practices. Their work wasn't driven by commerce alone. Monasteries needed reliable food supplies to feed growing religious communities. butter became an essential ingredient in monastery kitchens, particularly in colder regions where olive oil remained scarce. Ironically, butter also found itself at the center of religious controversy. During certain periods, the Catholic Church prohibited consuming animal fats during Lent and other fasting seasons. Olive oil was generally permitted in southern Europe, but many northern Christians relied almost entirely on butter for cooking. This created a dilemma. Communities dependent on butter faced strict dietary restrictions that were difficult to follow. The solution arrived in an unusual form. People could purchase special permissions, known as butter dispensations, allowing them to consume butter during fasting periods. In exchange, churches often received donations used to construct buildings, maintain cathedrals, or support charitable work. One famous legend claims that the magnificent butter tower of Rouen Cathedral in France was partially financed through these payments. Whether every detail of that story is true remains debated, but historical records confirm that butter dispensations became widespread in parts of Europe. Few foods have ever influenced architecture. Butter managed to do exactly that, while Europe refined dairy farming. Another extraordinary discovery waited beneath its soil. Across Ireland, workers cutting peat from ancient bogs occasionally uncovered mysterious wooden containers buried deep underground. Inside them was butter, not fresh butter. Ancient butter. Some of these deposits had rested beneath layers of peat for hundreds or even thousands of years. This remarkable substance became known as bog butter at first. Archaeologists wondered whether it had been buried as a religious offering. Others believed it was hidden from thieves during times of conflict. Today, many researchers think the answer may have been more practical. The cool, oxygen-poor environment inside peat bogs acted like a natural refrigerator, slowing spoilage and protecting butter far longer than ordinary storage methods. Chemical analysis has dated some examples to more than 2,000 years old. Imagine opening a container of butter that had remained hidden since before the Roman Empire reached Britain. These discoveries reveal just how valuable butter had become. People were willing to bury it, protect it, and return for it months or even years later. As medieval trade expanded, butter traveled farther than ever before. Merchant ships carried barrels across the North Sea and Baltic Sea, linking Scandinavian kingdoms with England, the Low Countries, and northern Germany. Ports grew wealthier, trade routes became busier. Butter joined wool, timber, fish, and grain as one of northern Europe's defining exports. By now, butter was no longer merely food for farmers. It appeared on the tables of nobles, merchants, soldiers, monks, and kings. Royal kitchens demanded the finest quality. Professional dairy workers supplied growing cities. Specialized butter makers built reputations that passed from one generation to the next. Entire communities became known for producing superior butter. Yet, success brought new challenges as populations increased and cities expanded. Traditional hand churning could no longer satisfy demand. Producing butter one household at a time wasn't enough anymore. A revolution was coming, powered not by stronger arms, but by machines. The Industrial Revolution would transform butter production forever, turning a handcrafted village product into one of the world's first truly mass-produced foods for thousands of years. Making butter depended almost entirely on human effort. Every batch required hours of work. Families collected cream over several days before pouring it into wooden churns. Then came the exhausting part. The cream had to be shaken, stirred, or pumped continuously until the fat finally separated from the liquid. It was slow. It was physically demanding. And it limited how much butter any community could produce. But during the 18th and 19th centuries, the world entered a period unlike anything it had experienced before. The Industrial Revolution. Steam engines powered factories, machines replaced manual labor, railways connected distant cities. Ships crossed oceans faster than ever before. Almost every industry was transformed. Butter would not be left behind. One of the greatest breakthroughs came with the invention of mechanical butter churns. Instead of relying on hours of back-breaking labor, rotating machines could process much larger quantities of cream in a fraction of the time. What once required an entire family could now be accomplished by a single worker operating machinery. Production increased dramatically. Costs fell. Butter became more affordable for ordinary people. Yet, another invention proved even more revolutionary. In 1878, a Swedish engineer named Gustav de Laval introduced the centrifugal cream separator. At first glance, it looked like a simple spinning machine. In reality, it changed dairy farming forever. Before its invention, farmers had to wait patiently for cream to rise naturally to the surface of fresh milk, depending on the temperature. This could take many hours, or even an entire day. The centrifugal separator eliminated the waiting. By spinning milk at extremely high speeds, centrifugal force instantly separated the cream from the skim milk. The process became faster, cleaner, more efficient. Farmers could process larger quantities of milk before spoilage became a problem. The invention spread rapidly across Europe and North America, becoming one of the most important technologies in agricultural history. Suddenly, dairy farms no longer depended on traditional methods passed down through generations. Alone, science had entered the dairy. As factories expanded, butter production shifted from small villages into industrial facilities. Large dairies collected milk from hundreds of nearby farms every day. Instead of dozens of cows supplying one family, thousands of cows now supplied entire cities. Quality also improved. Industrial producers introduced standardized recipes, cleaner equipment, and better hygiene. Butter became more consistent in flavor, texture, and appearance than ever before. Consumers knew what they were buying. That consistency helped build trust. For the first time, butter became a reliable commercial product rather than a locally variable food. Transportation also transformed the industry. Railroads connected rural dairy regions with rapidly growing urban centers. Fresh butter could now reach distant markets before spoiling. Refrigerated railway cars appeared during the late 19th century. Soon afterward came refrigerated ships. These innovations completely changed global trade. Countries with excellent grazing land could export butter across oceans while maintaining quality. New Zealand became one of the greatest examples. Its mild climate and vast pastures allowed farmers to raise enormous dairy herds. Refrigerated shipping enabled butter produced in the southern hemisphere to reach consumers thousands of kilometers away in Britain. What had once been impossible became routine. Fresh butter crossed entire oceans. Australia soon joined the expanding dairy trade, followed by Denmark, the Netherlands, Ireland, and other nations whose economies increasingly depended on dairy exports. Butter had become a global commodity, yet prosperity also brought fierce competition as cities expanded during the 19th century. Demand for butter exploded. Unfortunately, producing enough milk to satisfy everyone wasn't always possible. Prices rose, shortages appeared. Entrepreneurs searched desperately for cheaper alternatives. Answer arrived from France in 1869. Emperor Napoleon III offered a prize for anyone who could develop an inexpensive substitute for butter that would help feed both the military and the growing urban population. A French chemist named Hippolyte Mougemoris accepted the challenge. After extensive experimentation, he created a product made primarily from beef fat mixed with milk. He called it oleomargarine. Today, we simply know it as margarine, although the earliest versions tasted very different from modern margarine. The invention immediately challenged butter's dominance. Consumers suddenly had another option. For dairy farmers, it represented a serious threat. Across Europe and North America, heated debates erupted over butter versus margarine. Some governments introduced strict labeling laws to prevent imitation products from being sold as real butter. Others banned manufacturers from coloring margarine yellow because officials feared customers would mistake it for butter. In some places, margarine was even sold with separate packets of coloring that consumers mixed at home after purchase. The rivalry lasted for decades. Advertising campaigns promoted butter as natural, traditional, and wholesome. Margarine companies emphasized affordability and modern manufacturing. The competition shaped food marketing for generations. Meanwhile, scientists continued improving butter itself. Researchers discovered how bacteria influenced flavor development. Pasteurization reduced dangerous microorganisms in milk. Temperature-controlled production created more consistent results. Packaging improved. Wax paper protected freshness. Later, aluminum foil and modern refrigeration extended shelf life even further. By the early 20th century, butter had completed an extraordinary journey. What began as an accidental discovery inside a bouncing leather bag had evolved into one of the world's most sophisticated food industries. Factories produced thousands of kilograms every day. International trade, continents. Scientific research refined recipes. Modern technology ensured quality on a scale ancient civilizations could never have imagined. Yet, despite all these advances, butter's story was far from over. A new challenge was approaching. It wouldn't come from another invention or a rival product. It would come from science itself. For much of the 20th century, butter would find itself accused of contributing to heart disease, transforming one of humanity's oldest foods into one of its most controversial. Its greatest battle was no longer against spoilage. It was against its own reputation. By the middle of the 20th century, butter faced the greatest crisis in its long history. For thousands of years, it had been celebrated as a symbol of health, prosperity, and nourishment. Kings had eaten it. Farmers had depended on it. Religious ceremonies had honored it. Entire economies had been built around it. Then science began asking a difficult question. Could one of humanity's oldest foods actually be harming us? During the 1950s and 1960s, heart disease became one of the leading causes of death in many industrialized countries. Researchers searched for answers, and attention quickly turned toward saturated fat and cholesterol, because butter naturally contains high amounts of saturated fat. It soon found itself at the center of an international debate. Health organizations encouraged people to reduce butter consumption. Newspapers published alarming headlines. Television advertisements promoted margarine as the healthier alternative. Across supermarkets, consumers began replacing butter with products that claimed to protect the heart. For the first time in thousands of years, butter was losing its place at the center of the dinner table. Dairy farmers watched demand decline. Adapted, some feared butter's story was coming to an end. Yet, history has a habit of refusing simple answers. As nutritional science continued to evolve, researchers began re-examining earlier studies. They realized that diet was far more complex than anyone had first imagined. Health could not be explained by a single food alone. Exercise mattered. Overall eating patterns mattered. Genetics mattered. Lifestyle mattered. Butter itself became the subject of new research. scientists discovered that butter contains important fat-soluble vitamins, including vitamins A, D, E, and K. It also contains butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that researchers continue studying for its possible role in supporting digestive health. That didn't mean butter suddenly became a miracle food, nor did it mean unlimited amounts were healthy. Instead, many nutrition experts began promoting a more balanced message. Moderation. Rather than treating butter as either a dangerous villain or a perfect superfood. Many modern dietary guidelines recognize that it can fit within a balanced diet when consumed in reasonable amounts. The debate that once seemed settled had become far more nuanced while scientists continued their research. Another movement was quietly changing butter's reputation. People began looking backward instead of forward. Consumers who had grown tired of highly processed foods started searching for traditional methods once again. Farmers' markets expanded. Small dairies reopened. Artisanal butter makers returned to techniques that resembled those used centuries earlier. Instead of producing butter as quickly as possible, these craftspeople focused on flavor. Cream was cultured before churning. Milk came from grass-fed cattle. Some butters contained crystals of sea salt. Others developed rich, nutty flavors through slow fermentation around the world. Butter became something to appreciate rather than simply consume. France became famous for luxurious cultured butter with deep, complex flavors. Ireland earned international recognition for butter made from cows grazing on lush green pastures. In Italy, butter played an essential role in the cuisine of the North, where creamy sauces and fresh pasta reflected centuries of dairy traditions. Across Scandinavia, dairy craftsmanship continued to evolve through generations of expertise. Even countries once known primarily for olive oil embraced butter in countless recipes, blending ancient traditions with modern tastes. Chefs celebrated it. Bakers relied on it. Restaurants proudly advertised butter sourced from local farms. Few ingredients could match its ability to transform food. Butter gave pastries their delicate layers. It enriched sauces until they became silky and smoothed it browned beautifully in hot pans, creating aromas that generations of cooks instantly recognized. From flaky croissants in Paris to butter chicken in India, from Scottish shortbread to American biscuits, butter quietly connected cultures separated by oceans and centuries. Its journey had become truly global. Today, butter is produced on every inhabited continent. Modern dairy farms use advanced technology to monitor the health of cattle, improve animal welfare, and maintain food safety. Automated milking systems, refrigerated storage tanks, and computerized quality testing ensure that millions of people receive fresh dairy products every day. Yet, despite all this technology, the basic principle remains almost unchanged. Cream. Motion. Time. The same simple process that may have happened accidentally thousands of years ago still lies at the heart of butter making. That is perhaps the most remarkable part of its story. Human civilization has transformed beyond recognition, have built cities that touch the clouds. We have crossed oceans in hours instead of months. We have walked on the moon and sent spacecraft beyond the edge of our solar system. But the process that first turned milk into butter remains beautifully simple. Some historians believe it happened inside a leather bag tied to the side of a traveling animal. Others suggest different origins. The exact moment may never be known. What is certain is that one unexpected discovery helped feed civilizations, preserve precious nutrition through harsh winters, support religious traditions, strengthen international trade, inspire scientific innovation, and shape cuisines across the globe. Very few foods can claim a history like that. The next time you spread butter across a slice of warm bread or watch it melt into a hot pan, you're not just using another ingredient. You're holding the result of thousands of years of human curiosity, adaptation, and survival. From ancient nomads crossing forgotten landscapes to modern kitchens around the world, butter has remained a quiet companion to civilization. Empires have risen, empires have fallen, borders have changed, languages have disappeared. Butter endured, not because it was luxurious, not because it was fashionable, but because generation after generation discovered that within something so simple lay an extraordinary story, and perhaps that's the greatest lesson history can offer. The objects we overlook every day often carry the longest, richest, and most fascinating stories of all.